as it is coming to be used practically in all other walks of life, any goal satisfactory alike to the community and to the teacher will be difficult of attainment. The only way to reconcile town and gown is that efficiency has to be the mark of the modern teacher. The report, of course, was applauded by the business community, and of course they had been instrumental in creating it. Indeed, in this era, captains of industry were increasingly on the boards of colleges and universities. Others, of course, were not so happy. In an article that appeared the next year in the Atlantic Monthly in 1911, a man named Henry Davis Bushnell, I haven't yet been able to track him down, I don't know who he was, but he wrote a response to Cook's report. He starts off by saying, look, I don't want to deny that there are useful things to be learned from this report, right? He says, quote, "We will gladly see gardeners and janitors, bookkeepers and others who carry on the true business machinery of the university caused to labor under conditions of the least waste and the greatest efficiency." So, sure, let's do it to the gardeners and the groundskeepers and all of that, he says. But never with equanimity can we grant that there exists a parallel, an analogy between the processes of turning out steel rails and those of turning out men of the widely diversified capacities of our A.B. degree holders. He goes on to say, no right-thinking person should buy into the production metaphor, the metaphor that every hour that he, the student or the professor, occupies 2 square feet of lecture room space, he must be expected to produce so many dollars worth of, and listen to this highly hyphenated phrase, must be expected to produce so many dollars worth of lecture room professor-student hours worth of education in money value. And then he thunders, at least it seems to in print, produce? That is not what he is there for, and that is what makes the fallacy in the argument apparent. Industrial methods of efficiency look to the production of a commodity at the least expense for the greatest profit. All is subordinated to that theory. And then he concludes by saying, better that waste and inefficiency should exist than that the educational ideals should be compromised. So all of this is being argued, it's being duked out 100 years ago, and it's still being duked out, right? And to a large extent in the same terms. But what I want to call your attention to is the 2 dimensions along which I think the engineering more, faster, better perspective is being argued. One of them, of course, is the subject matter itself. Where does the liberal arts belong, if anywhere? In a world that is becoming efficient and productive, maybe all we really need is professional and vocational training, right? Andrew Carnegie has a famous statement that the liberal arts are, quote, learning a little about the barbarous and petty squabbles of a far distant past, or trying to master languages which are dead. That's one of the quintessential. There were lots and lots of statements like that. So one of the arguments is what should colleges and universities teach? The other argument is how should they be organized and how should they be measured? And if we look back and see what has happened over this last 100 years, we see that the liberal arts, of course, still exist, and that there are still liberal arts colleges. We're lucky to be in one of them right now, like Amherst. But the debate between the liberal arts and the vocational continues on. And I don't know if any of you have seen this book, which I read in the last few months, called The Last Professors by Frank Donahue. The way I came to it was that Stanley Fish, who writes a column in the online New York Times, basically plugged it. This is a former student of his, and it's yet another of the arguments, the sad arguments, that we're coming to the end of liberal arts education in the United States, and who knows. Incidentally, I mean, the debate, this very debate, goes all the way back to Plato and the Sophists about whether professional education versus training the whole person. So at least for now, we can say, we still have the liberal arts. But I see the industrial perspective has actually won out in a couple of critical ways. One, is that all of our colleges and universities are managed by bureaucratic methods, by the methods and the measurement schemes that arose out of the engineering perspective. In fact, what is a CV? What is a resume? But actually a statement of our productivity, by which so often we are measured. I think there's probably a very interesting piece of work to be done, by the way, to look at the history of the CV as a political object. So in that sense, the engineers won. But there's another sense in which I think the engineers and the architects of more, faster, better have won. And that is that our entire culture is caught up in this more, faster, better doing mode, which leads to, among other things, what I have been talking about and worrying about, the no time to think phenomenon that I spoke in this room about last night. And those of you who want to see more of what I have to say about that can, of course, Google Levy, no time to think. And you'll find a journal article, a talk at Google that I gave, which is on YouTube and other things. So this sounds like really bad news, right? We've lost the battle in terms of the way that our institutions are organized. And we seem to have lost the battle with regard to the direction in which our entire culture is going. But I actually think, since I'm in an optimistic mood at the moment, that this is actually very good news. Because I think that it's taken what's happening now is it's taken about 100 years for us to begin to really see, and we're seeing it economically, we're seeing it in other arenas too, that there was a flaw in the machinery that got set up. And as we crank it faster and faster, as with any piece of machinery, even the human body, when you push it beyond its limits, it begins to break down. So I think we are in a better position than ever before to make the argument that more, faster, better in the academy and elsewhere is a losing proposition. And we're in a position to make the argument that we need to recover this other dimension, which we have been calling the contemplative. The way that I have been trying to talk about this increasingly in various audiences is to suggest that there are these two modes in which we as human beings engage. One being the instrumental. The most extreme form of instrumental goal-driven behavior is when we're rushing so fast to get ahead to go on to the next thing that we're never actually in touch with what we're doing at the moment, right? It's a totally manipulative form of engagement with the world. Is what Martin Buber called the I-it relationship. And then on the other hand, we have the receptive engagement. The engagement that is not future-oriented as much as it is present-oriented. And it is this dimension of receptivity and availability in the present that I think is what we are practicing and trying to learn and teach through contemplative practice. And part of my argument, that I've been making through my no time to think trademarked argument is that it's not really trademarked. It is that we're actually at a point where maybe we can begin to transcend the liberal versus the professional vocational divide that has, because and it's tempting to say, well, the liberal has to do with the receptive and the vocational or professional has to do with the instrumental. But in fact, any sincere, concentrated, careful activity or any kind of deep thinking clearly interweaves both the instrumental and the receptive.